right, let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Ba'Hashem, Yahushai, Ba'Hashem, Rucha Kodash. Welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is This War and Crisis Can Usher in the MOTB. Let's hope it does. And that's, hope. That's what we have as an anchor. We hope that everything that is going on right now, prophecy-wise, is going to speed up the MOTB, because it's coming. It's here and it's coming, and it's going to be fully fulfilled. But let's just hope this helps push it along a lot faster. This morning I was listening to the priest Yasha Moth here, GMS Kingdom Minded 144, from the Mississippi camp, and pretty much that's kind of like a normal thing. I mean, there's certain videos I watch in the morning, just to kind of get into the mindset of what's going on. And he does in the mornings he does something called Morning News and Prophecy. This one is called This War Will Cause Food Shortages, and yep, he's absolutely right. You have a lot of individuals out there saying they can't afford the constant rise in prices, which is pretty much inflation, possibly heading to hyperinflation if things get worse and worse, which they will eventually. So there, certain farmers and individuals are having to cut back a lot. So there's going to be shortages. So shortages cause, panic, and panic causes panic buying, and panic buying causes, desperation, and desperation causes chaos. And this is pretty much where the international bankers want everything at, in a chaotic type of way. Now, what I want to do is, I actually found the part here where the priest, goes into the Jimmy Dore show, and there's this woman, Fritz, I think her last name is, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to play a little bit of this, because while she was speaking, she pretty much was speaking about the reset, and pretty much she was speaking about digital, I believe she said digital currency, if I'm not mistaken, which that's pretty much what the bankers want. They want, because they have the infrastructure in place, they have the digital system in place. All they want to do is have it running completely, so that can, push, their agenda forward, and the ability to set up something called geofencing, and geofencing pretty much means to corral the whole world into this system, and you have to, either comply with the system or get locked out of the system. You'll be outside of the fence. All right, matter of fact, geofencing meaning, here we go. We'll come back to this other one. Geofencing, the use of GPS or RFID technology to create a virtual geographic boundary, enabling software to trigger a response when a mobile device enters or leaves a particular area. All right, so pretty much you have a movie called, In Time, right? And there's others. You have Hunger Games, so on and so forth. And in this movie here, it was pretty much the MOTB, but they had it in the form of time. And you could only enter certain regions if you had enough time to enter those regions. You see, so everything was, set up into different zones, just like the Hunger Games. And that's pretty much what they want to bring. That's what they want. They have something called these 15-minute cities, which pretty much, when you look at the way things are going up, and the way, as far as, when I mean going up, I mean as far as the building, everything is being built in a centralized location where people have all of their basic needs around them, grocery stores or supermarkets, or the cinema, or nail salon, or coffee shop, or liquor store, you know, whatever the case is, things that they need right within the, you know, pretty much within walking distance of where they live, because this is how they're building the future, because this is what they want. They want to have what they call 15-minute cities. And this is all dealing with this whole, you know, beast system. So it says 15-minute cities are urban mixed-use neighborhoods designed to provide residents with essential services, work, food, health, and education within a 15-minute walk or bike ride, aiming to boost sustainability. Right. This is a what's that word I'm looking for? Trigger word, sustainability. All right, 2030. You know, sustainable development. You know, whenever you see the word sustainable, pretty much it means, you know, pretty much you have they plan on sustaining the population of the planet, you know, to a sustainable, you know, amount of people to so-called save the planet, you know, because, you know, there's too much overhead, you know, on the planet. And quality of life. Key features include high density, green spaces, and reduced car reliance, with major cities like Paris and Bogota implementing it. That's in Colombia. Though some fear it restricts movement, and that's exactly what it does, because they want to restrict movement. And that is, you know, in direct violation of the scriptures. Isaiah chapter 5 and verse 8, woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. Right, and this is what the international bankers are doing. They're pretty much, because, you know, they're not going to be in no damn 15-minute city. In the lesson that we did Sunday with the elder apostle Gabar, you know, he pulled up, you know, the big-ass mansion, I forget what it's called, the big-ass mansion that the Rothschilds live in. You know, you think they're going to live in a 15-minute city? No, this is for the average serf, the average slave on the planet, living in these conditions while they're living alone in the earth, lavishly. NLT says, what sorrow for you who buy up houses after house and field after field until everyone is evicted and you live alone in the land. Yeah, and pretty much this is what they've done too. They bought field and land, because Kill Bates himself, he bought a whole bunch of land, and there's different, you know, corporations out there that have bought a lot of land here in America. I don't know the percentage of it. You know, I haven't really looked into that. That's not, you know, something I have looked into, but I have seen little, you know, articles and things of that nature popping up here and there. And different videos talk about that, but not, you know, a lot. You know, and pretty much what they're doing is so that they can buy these places, you know, pretty much, and, you know, use them how they want to use them, you know, to pretty much restrict movement. And that's pretty much what it is. It's all about restriction, and that's what geofencing is about. The restriction of movement, you know, the 15-minute cities. You know, so let's go back. Let me bring this back. So 15-minute cities are urban mixed use neighborhoods designed to provide residents with essential services, work, food, health, and education within a 15-minute walk or bike ride. All right. Then down here it says, though some fear it restricts movement, and that's exactly what it's about. It's about restricting movement. All right, so let's go back to here. And let's play this video. Fair use, fair use, fair use. I don't own the copyrights to the Jimmy Dore show. I'm just playing, you know, some video and sharing information with you that the priest shared, and I'm also sharing on my channel.
We have our special guest with us. Catherine Austin Fitz is back to the show. She's an American investment banker who served as managing director of Dillon Reed and Company and as United States Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development for Housing in George W. Herbert Walker Bush's administration. She's also co-authored a report in 2017 alleging 21 trillion in unauthorized spending by the United States Department of Defense and U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development over a 17-year period. Welcome back to the show, Catherine Austin Fitts. Good to see you.
Jimmy, it's good to see you.
So now, we were just talking briefly before we started about how I'm feeling anxious about the war, and you said that an infection has to bubble up to the surface. Is that how you described it?
Yeah, so I think we have a problem, and our problem is a secret governance system, and that secret governance system is centralizing control into a control grid that will end the democratic republic way of government.
So pretty much, she said, let me, Salaki, I have to bring that back a little bit. Control, I believe she said control grid system, something along those lines.
Feeling anxious about the war, and you said that an infection has to bubble up to the surface. Is that how you described it?
Yeah, so I think we have a problem, and our problem is a secret governance system, and that secret governance system is centralizing control into a control grid that will end the democratic
Control system. One more time.
Secret governance system is centralizing control into a control grid that will end.
A control grid. The control grid is a wire mesh or helix electrode in a vacuum tube located between the cathode. Let's see. Let's try a control grid as an electrode. Let's see controlled grid. A control. I put controlled. It's not really giving me. Opponent like two negatively charged with the. May give me the same crap, yeah. Yeah, it's gonna keep giving me the same bullshit. Yeah, so pretty much control, because what is control? To have, to have power over something. It says the power to influence or direct people's behavior to the course of events. And then if you have something called a grid, what is the grid? A framework of spaced bars that are parallel, inside joke, parallel to or cross each other, or grafting. Right, and what is this? This is dealing with, the internet. A network of lines that cross each other to form a series of squares or rectangles, right? Because this is how, the information is read through the internet. It says put into a set out as a grid. So if you look at images, these are grids, So you have this type of grid, which, drawings, but you also have internet grids. And this is the internet grid. So where everything is interconnected with each other. And this is pretty much what they want. They want everything to be interconnected, from point A to point B, so on and so forth, so that they can control and track the movement of everything. But now, if they want to control the movement of everything, they have to insert a device into people that can be used for tracking. And that's what the UPC code was about. Back in the days, George Laurer, who worked for IBM, he was an American engineer, all right, and he was the one that, using another individual's idea, invented the UPC code. See, what did George Laurer invent? The Universal Product Code. George Laurer developed the Universal Product Code. And what is a Universal Product Code? He is known as a co-inventor of the barcode, as he developed the Universal Product Code, UPC. He developed a scanner that could read the codes digitally, because everything is going digital. And even back in the 80s, I'm not too sure about the 70s, but definitely in the 80s, you had Zapp. They had a song called "Computer Love," where he was pretty much the first one, if I'm not mistaken, that used auto-tune. Then you had the group Ready for the World had a song called "Digital Display." So they've been, even from way back then, they've been conditioning the people to what you see today. Everything being digital, digital robots, anime, and all that stuff. That was all a part of the wave of the future, this virtual reality stuff. Why? Because everything goes back to Revelation 13, whether it's something that's inserted into the hand or into the forehead, metapon. All right. He also had the idea to use stripes to materialize the barcode, right? And that's the stripes, right? Images. You know what? Let me just type it. There goes the UPC code right up above it. And there was another individual, it looks here like two, that he pretty much used, and he died in 2019. I didn't know he was still alive. And he used, some of their ideas and pretty much, came up with the UPC code. All right, UPC code, Universal Product Code. And this was put on products to make it easier. And he not only that, but he also had the scanner to be able to scan these things. And he said that he came up with an idea with all these different little lines, and each line, if you look at them, they're all different widths, and some of them are single, some of them are double, and some of them are just, some of them are thicker, some of them are thinner. All right. And within the grid, whenever you see the 6, you see these two thin lines. Well, that's all throughout the whole thing, the beginning, the middle, and the end, which is right here. This one has a 3, so it's one, what is it? Let me see if I can find another one right here. Boom, boom, boom. See, this one has a third one there. Usually it's just 2, but I think this goes with another number. But right here, boom, 2, 2, 2, which is what? If you look at the 6, 2 thin lines. And that goes into what? 6, 6, 6, which goes into Revelation, 13. I'm gonna play the video. I just wanted to, highlight a few points. Revelation 13 and 18. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath the understanding count the number of the beast, for it is a number of a man, and his number is 666, which is where you get the number 666. And that's their number. And it's no coincidence that the internet is called the World Wide Web, www dot. Now W, is the 24th letter of the alphabet. The 24th letter of the alphabet, 2 and 4 is what? 6. So 666. And then you have the Wa, which is the Hebrew letter Wa, which is also a 6. And they use a lot of symbolism in what they do. And I'm pretty sure, see right there, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666, which is Chi Psi Stigma when you look at it in the Greek. Chi Psi Stigma, and the stigma means something that's pricked or inserted into you. All right, and that goes hand in hand with the Greek word for mark, which is charagma, which is the device. Then it goes into the root carrox, which is the delivery system, to insert it, and then it goes into the root grapho, which are the writings, It could either be something that's chiseled into a idol or into a wall, when you chisel something out, or like you have hieroglyphs, those are like chisels, or it's records, things stored, and it makes sense. Or when you put all three of them together, the device, the delivery system, and the storage, because that's what they want. They want to put a device in the whole everybody on the planet to be able to track everybody, and this is why you have something called geofencing. This is why you had the UPC code, because this was a way to test this out, because this was easier to keep track of inventory too, but it was all set up to eventually track people, because that's what the IBM was all about. Because this guy worked for IBM. He worked for IBM. An American engineer for IBM. IBM, the international business machine, I believe it is. Which used to be called the tabulating system. All right, it was called the was it Hollerith? Original name of IBM Computing Tabulating Recording Company, ITR. The Tabulating Machine Company, TMC. Original components. All right. Let's see. Yeah, the Computing Tabulating Recording Company. And you get the word tab, keeping tabs on people. That's where you get it from, tabulating, to be able to, keep track of people. All right. And this same technology was used during World War II, on the small hats to track them. And that was like, like a form of the Social Security number. But now that that everything is in place and they have their whole grid up, everything now is going to be put into into digital form. And this is pretty much what she's talking about, Catherine Fritz, or Fitz. That's what she's talking about. Just want to get back to what I had. Okay, so let's play some more.
The democratic republic way of government that we in the United States have enjoyed will shred the Constitution, and they continue to do things that consolidate power, and war is one of them. And I think that problem is going to keep getting worse and worse and worse until they fail or we change it.
So
and she said something about how, because we said the secret governance, you talking about the elites, and how they utilize war to consolidate power. Okay, and we know, all right, they want to consolidate, power to a technocracy. Okay, because in their mind, they're going to manage this war. Okay, and as these nations pummel each other, all right, they're going to be able to consolidate power, more power to themselves. Okay, and that's why you have this greater Israel project. Okay, because they want to, all right, move, all right, the centralized power, okay, to the state of Israel. Okay, and these people like Netanyahu, they're just characters. Okay.
Yeah, speaking of Netanyahu, right? There's all kind of, theories of what happened to him. He's dead. He's in the hospital in critical condition. Apostle Tara mentioned that he likes to shoot his mouth like Trump, and he likes to be in the spotlight. So it's unlike him not to have shown himself in the last 7-8 days or whatever the case is. Now, I was thinking about it. I was saying, well, what if this is a way for him to fake his own, deletion, because remember he's up on war charges and war crime charges. So I was thinking, what if he, you is going to use this as a way of having himself deleted? I'm just, this is just a thought that came to mind. I'm not saying this is what's going to happen. And just use that as a way of saying he got deleted so that he can escape those war criminal or war crime charges. It's just a thought, like I said, but they don't know what's going on. I was watching Kim Iverson. She was speaking about it, different theories that people are coming up with and different videos that, which we've been talking about, the different videos that came up that seem to be AI, so on and so forth. But let's go.
Tasked with being on the front line, doing the groundwork, getting these things done. Trump, okay, they're just characters, all right? That's put on the ground to do the groundwork to get these things done. Okay, do what needs to be done on the ground while the elites are in the background manipulate the markets, manipulate events, okay, to bring about, okay, more war, okay, because they want to consolidate more power to themselves. They want to take away the power from the nation states, so in their mind, this war is going to weaken all the nation states, okay, and they go unscathed, all right, and they come, okay, and set a technocracy on top of the ashes of this third world war, okay, merge everyone with technology, man, okay, so these devils, these elites, in their mind, they're going to use, okay, this war as a global crisis to create global desperation, all right, to weaken these nations, to weaken these governments, okay, and they step in and establish a technocracy, okay? See, their post-war ambitions is a technocracy running the earth, okay? But that's going to collide with the prophecy of Yahweh Bashim al-Shai, of the Heavenly Father, okay? Setting Yahweh Shai up as the King of Kings. See, this is where, all right, the elites collide with the will of the Heavenly Father, okay? Is this post-World War III ambition of the elites, thinking that they're going to establish a technocracy. Well, no. The scriptures say the Lord, okay, the Heavenly Father, is going to establish his Son as King of Kings and Lord of Lords after this World War. Okay? Which we'll get in a minute, but let's just play. She's going to go into some things.
The problem, you mean, of secret governance control over us, that problem?
Well, it's both secret governance system. So let me go back. The fundamental bureaucracy, or the key bureaucracy to that control system, is the central banking system. And the model we've used in the West is called the central banking warfare system. So the central banks print money and the military make sure they take it. And every 80 to 120 years, that system does a reset, which is a monumental change. It's a complete, and in fact, it's a change in which plague laws traditionally have been part of what they do to centralize control of labor and capital. And
now you notice everything in the future, right, dealing with this everything that's happening is all going centered around control, centered around finance, centered around the economy. That's why Elder Pastor Tar always spoke about, learning about the economy, get a decent understanding of how money works, how economies work, so that you could understand prophecy, because everything is pretty much controlled. And this is why they wanted to centralize everything, centralize banking, because when you centralize something, it's all running through one particular avenue. And that's pretty much what these bankers have done. And this is why during 1944, I believe she's going to mention that, if I'm not mistaken, no, she actually mentioned between World War I and World War II, I believe. But that's why in 1944 you had the Bretton Woods Agreement, and that established the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. And when they established the dollar as a world reserve currency, all nations had to, I don't want to use the word peg, but that's what they use, the word they use, peg, their currencies to the dollar to be able to function in this system. But you with that, with physical currency, you could manipulate. You could hide, stuff. But with digital currency, you can't do that because everything is out. It's just numbers that are punched, and they can see numbers punching in, numbers punching out, and that's pretty much what they want, total control. And with physical currency, which is pretty much what they want, and people have been speaking about that going back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, about cashless societies, and because when you have cash or you have physical currency comes with management. It comes with overhead. It comes with you have to pay for these things, right? And what it creates when you go digital, it eliminates the need for physical currency, which eliminates having to pay to make this physical currency, even though it doesn't cost them much, but it's still money they have to pay out to make it, for people to print it, for the printing presses, and for everything that goes, for the building, so on and so forth. So if you eliminate physical currency, you eliminate all that overhead, right? So I want to hit that real quick. I typed in, what is financial overhead cost? Financial overhead costs are the indirect ongoing expenses required to maintain business of operations that are not directly tied to producing a specific product or service. These necessary, often fixed expenses such as rent, utilities, insurance, and administrative salaries must be paid regardless of sales volume. So this is a way for them to eliminate all of this. So that remember, the scriptures say that these devils are greedy; they can never have enough. They have more than their hearts could wish, but they still want more. It's not enough. So this is to set up a digital system is an international banker's dream, because you have to understand, with the physical currency and all that money that they have to pay to keep it going, or the money that they do have to pay to keep it going, business-wise, if it's set up digitally, then it's nothing more than numbers being punched into a computer. You see? So there's no physical money to move around, physical money to print, no physical buildings that have to be built, electricity having to be paid, salaries having to be paid, so on. So it eliminates all of that. So it gives them damn near 100% of their investments, whatever the case is, to them. It goes straight into their pocket. So this is pretty much the international banker's dream. It is their top dream. So let's go back.
Do their reset. Oftentimes you switch the reserve currency when that happens, and we are in the middle of a reset. And it's a gut-wrenching one, because you're talking about unbelievably fundamental changes to the central bank warfare model. They're looking to use digital technology to go to a whole new model that sort of ends currency and goes to a technocratic control grid. That's a once every 500 years event. That's huge. So if you're feeling like you're being rocked and rolled, that's why. It's the reinvention of everything.
So you're saying this reset, what was the last reset?
It was basically the Spanish flu, and after World War I, they did a reset. And essentially, if you go back, the reserve currency was the sterling. And then the U.S. created the Federal Reserve that gave them the ability to then do, between World War I and World War II, a duopoly between sterling and the dollar. And then World War II, it went all to the dollar. And so the last reset basically moved from sterling.
Yeah, she's talking about I believe the British pound and the U.S. dollar. It was a duality, but then 1944 changed that and gave it all directly to the U.S. dollar. And that pretty much set up a new world order, because at that point the British pound lost, its world reserve currency status, and then the U.S. dollar took over. Now we're at the point where the U.S. dollar did the damage it needed by bringing all these economies of the world, you know, in debt, you know, and now, you know, they're ready for the reset because the grid and everything surrounding it is already set up and in place. All they have to do is, you know, either have a crisis or have, you know, something to push, you know, the envelope, so to speak, for the MOTB or the digital system to be established so that they can bring in what they really want to bring in, which is the MOTB, which is the MOTB system, but they want to bring in the actual MOTB, which is the micro CHIP. So Jeremiah chapter 51:7 says, Babylon has been a golden cup in the Lord's hand that made all the earth drunken. See, and they became drunken through democracy, but also through their finance, because in order for them to participate, they had to, you know, play along, you know, with the whole system. You know, it wasn't just a matter of doing deals with them. You know, you had to play the part. It says the nations have drunken over wine, therefore the nations are what? Mad. So they're pissed off, you know, because they're seeing that things ain't working, and that's why eventually, I believe it's in this chapter or the one before, it says that the nations are going to eventually leave and go back to their country, because, you know, they're seeing that first of all, they're seeing that the business deal that they had at one point, they're not gaining the capital that they used to. You know, the amount of money, you know, kickback that they used to. So if they go back to their country and have the business in their country and then ship it to America, now they get more of a kickback because it's cheaper labor and cheaper, you know, material and overhead in their country than it is to do business here in America. You know, and eventually you know, some of them are going to get away from it before this place is destroyed. You know, so this is what we see going on, the whole implosion of the old system run by the US dollar, which was the plan in the first place, to bring in the new reset or the new system, which is the digital system, which is the MOTB system, to introduce the micro CHIP eventually to the world. And at that point, that's when things will start speeding up a lot faster. All right?
Sterling to the duopoly with the dollar and sterling after World War One.
Oh, okay. And
But real quick, let's just go into what she's speaking of with this sterling, all right, which was the British pound. Okay, so when you go into this sterling, let's see, it's a reset. All right, that was a attempt in the reset.
Yep.
Okay. Now, when you go into, I asked how long was sterling the world currency, because that was the world currency before the dollar.
Yep.
Okay, but they reset. Okay, the
And then you had before the British pound, you had the Dutch guilder, and the Dutch guilder was like the world reserve currency unofficially of its time, you know, until the British pound took over. Then after that, the US dollar took over. Now we're at the point of the new world reserve currency about to take over, which is the digital currency.
currencies in World War I, World War II. Okay, in World War II, it completely transitioned to the dollar. Okay, because after World War I, you know, you had the sterling and the dollar pretty much neck and neck. But after World War II, okay, the U.S. dollar, okay, had the edge on the sterling. Okay, because, you know, British was so war torn. That's why these nations,
Right.
you know, really they're trying to.
And that's, you know, that's another way America got up in there, because they were able to lend money to those nations, the so-called European nations, to rebuild their country. I believe that was the Marshall Plan, you know, and that pretty much brought all of them into debt, because they, like the priest said, you know, they were war torn. You know, there were bombs that were actually dropped, you know, in England, in London, so on and so forth. So they were jacked up. So so-called Europe had to rebuild, you know. So they were pretty much in a bad situation after World War I.
for the longest they've been trying to avoid war because they know, if you get caught up in the war, it sets you back decades.
Yeah.
You get caught in the war, it'll set you back decades, man.
And that's why they don't, them NATO countries, I think the hell with America, because America told them, look, we need everybody on, all you in NATO nations. He wanted a certain amount of nations to come to the straits to reopen the straits, but they're like, nah, because you all the way over here on this side of the world, them Iranians can't hit you over here, but they could hit our country, And let me see, somebody sent me, a brother sent me something. Just bear with me 1 second. I want to remember who sent that to me. Just bear with me 1 second. It was an actual, let me see, it wasn't this brother. Because it was the different countries that Trump said, look, he said, look, you either gonna comply or or help us out or something bad, some real fucking bad is gonna happen. No, that's not it. If I can't find it, then it's okay. Wait a minute, this might be it. Okay, it says Justin Trump warns. This is from X. Justin Trump warns NATO faces a very bad future if allies don't help open the Strait of Hormuz. And there was somebody else sent me something similar to that, but what it was different nations that America was singling out. But for some reason I can't find it at this moment. I just wanted to read some of those nations. But I can't seem to find it at the moment. But no worries. If I don't find it, then we'll move on. It could have been, yeah. No, let me open this up. Nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it. All right, no worries. So let's continue on, and I'm gonna play a little bit more, and then I'm gonna skip over here to the rest of this, little bit more of this interview, and then see what the Spirit gives me for precepts for you.
The nations, they want to go into, this new world order with strength. Okay?
Yep. Salakia, my brother.
And that was, but the creation of the Fed was before World War I, right? Correct?
Right. Before you can have reserve or currency responsibility, whether it's as sharing it with the sterling or sharing it with or being your own reserve currency, you need certain infrastructure to manage those positions and interaction with other parties around the world. And that was one of the reasons they wanted to put the Fed in operation. But at the same time they brought in the Fed, they did all sorts of things to back up that system, including creating the IRS and implementing all sorts of federal taxation. And I would say they also brought in the drugs and significantly increased drug trafficking in the United States to build the enforcement mechanisms that they also needed. So that, there was a series of different things that happened at the same time they did the Fed, which reorganizes institutions to help to continue to centralize control of power.
And
hello, my name is Adam Ferrari, and I'm the CEO of Energy. I look forward to you joining us at our next webinar where you can drill deeper into our bond offering. We currently offer 2 investment opportunities.
And so right now there's a reset happening that is as big as that?
I would say bigger.
Really?
And I would, yeah, because moving the reserve currency from the sterling to a duopoly between the U.S. and sterling That's a change within the model. Digital technology is fundamentally changing how the financial transactions are done. And
Right, because there's no physical money being exchanged. That's why I read here what is what is financial overhead cost. Now, this is not an actual, actual term. I don't believe. This is just how I try to put it together so that I could get, some feedback, online. It says it's coming from Investopedia. Because you have something called overhead, and that means you have a business, and you have bills that you have to pay in that business. You have electricity. You have plumbing. You have salaries that you have to pay. You have to buy furniture, so you have all these different bills that you have. But with a digital system, the overhead is a lot less. Because you don't have to pay all of these, you don't have to pay all of these extra expenses like printing money or having a building to where all this stuff is housed. Every people could work from the comfort of their own home, doing this. So that whole during the time of 2020 and above, the whole dynamic of working at the office, pretty much that dynamic was changed. Why? Because what they want is pretty much isolation. That's why prior to 2020, even before that, you actually speak to people on the streets, or speak to a woman or whatever the case is, right? Now, everything is done online. There's no physical contact. If you say something that people look at you straight, or if you say something to a woman, they give you this attitude, But if you hit them up online, it's a different story, because this is the dynamic that they're pushing to the world, is the separation of everybody just being, on their own, because they want to isolate everybody. In the movie 1984, they showed you that everyone was isolated. You couldn't really speak to people, you couldn't touch people too much. The only time you got to interact with them really was, in the lunchroom, eating that fake meat, as they're bringing out now. Now, this is something that's been in the making for a long time. So it says financial overhead costs are the indirect, ongoing expenses required to maintain business operations that are not directly tied to producing a specific product or service, right? Because you're pretty much having to pay for all of the things that you need in order to give that service. All right.
and ends currency. In other words, we went from one reserve currency to two kinds of reserve currency.
So you heard what she said, it ends currency.
And then to a third, US dollar standalone, but all of those were currencies. Now what they're trying to do is implement a control grid where you get rid of currencies and you just have, the combination of programmable money with...
See, programmable money. What is programmable money? It doesn't exist. Programmable money is a type of digital currency built on blockchain or distributed ledger technology, DLT, that uses embedded, automated rules to control how funds are used. These rules, often powered by smart contracts, allow money to automatically trigger transactions when specific pre-programmed conditions are met, such as automatic payments upon delivery, expiration dates, or usage restrictions without intermediaries. See? So no intermediary, no middleman. And there's restrictions because you've seen that one video, I think it's like 20 some odd minutes long, where pretty much the dude was, was in isolated in his house. They drop his food off. I believe every month they gave him, a certain amount of money, and they would, take out for him living there, for his, expenses, his food and everything. And he had a certain amount of time to spend that money. Otherwise, it would be reset. So every time you got your money, you weren't able to you had just enough, to make it through, and that was it. No longer do they want a system to where people could save money. They want they want to give you a certain fixed income. What is UBI, Universal Basic Income. This is all a part of the beast system to get everybody's mind set for this, MOTB, which is the micro CHIP. All right.
Rule systems that give total central control. So the head of the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of central bank, said in 2020, the beauty of the system is we can set the rules centrally and we have the technology to enforce them. Implement a control grid where you get rid of currencies and you just have, the combination of programmable money with rule systems that give total central control. So the head of the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of central bank, said in 2020, the beauty of the system is we can set the rules centrally and we have the technology to enforce them.
See?
Now,
and that's
he said it with respect.
And that's it right there, the power to enforce them. And this is what they want. So that's why it says in Revelation 13, going back to that, it says, Revelation 13:16, and he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads. Now, let's see what it says in the NLT. He required everyone, small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. When you go to this word causeth, I haven't looked this up in a while, poieo, right, to make, with the names of things made, to produce, construct, form, fashion, to make ready, to prepare, to acquire, to provide a thing for oneself, to execute, all right. So pretty much, he's gonna pretty much cause all people of the planet to receive this mark in order to be able to function. It says, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And this means what? Total control. Kicking you off of the grid if you are not compliant. And eventually it's going to go from being voluntary to being mandatory. How do we know that? Because Revelation 20 says that there's going to be the men of the Lord that are going to resist. Some of them are going to get their heads chopped off. Could be women in there also, that resist and get their heads chopped off. That it remains to be seen. So this is why it's going to go from voluntary at first, eventually to mandatory, because, these devils, when they do something, it's never what they say. It's always ambiguous. It's always open-ended. They never define anything properly or 100%, because they want it that way so that they can interpret it as they go along, because they know that rules change, things change. There's things that they have unforeseen, or that they haven't seen back when they first set up the system, that they're going to have to implement later on. So they leave it open-ended so they can interpret it as as it goes along. And that's why it speaks about in Isaiah the 10th chapter, in the first verse. We go right back to that. Isaiah 10:1. Woe to them that decree unrighteous decrees and that write grievousness which they have prescribed. So these are grievous laws that they're, putting on the books to pretty much grieve the people. Because, what was I thinking? The verse up above, the 11th verse of Revelation 13, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, which is America, that came or came in the same stead or the reincarnated version or resurfaced version of the Roman Empire, and you had two horns like a lamb. That's your bipartisan system, two-party system of the Congress, Senate, whatever the case is. And he spake as a dragon, you know, which goes into the draconian legislation. All right, and that's what they're pushing. So here in Isaiah 10 and 1 in the NLT, what sorrow awaits the unjust judges and those who issue unfair laws. And that's what it's all about, total control. You know, that's why it says that he causes all both small and great, rich and poor, to receive a mark in their right hand. And then also it says in the NLT in Revelation 13:17, and no one could buy or sell anything without that mark, which was either the name of the beast or the number representing his name, you know, which is all tied together. And that all goes what, into the 666, you know, the MOTB, you know, the whole system that they have going on, which is going to replace the way, you know, business is done worldwide, which is already in use. It's just not, you know, operational to the point where every form of currency is no longer needed, because everything is going to be tied to the micro CHIP, you know. And there was an individual, Sanders, Carl Sanders, I believe his name was, which was the inventor of the micro CHIP, you know, and he went through painstaking, you know, this before he figured out that it was the MOTB. He went through painstaking, you know, research to get this MOTB, the glass tube, and everything that went along with it, and trying to make sure everything was right down to the battery of it, you know, because they needed something that recharges itself, and they came up with, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was lithium. You know, I believe he used lithium because I forget all the details. There's a video on YouTube. You might be able to still find it. Carl I believe it's Saunders. It's Saunders or Sanders? Let me try Sanders. Inventor of micro. See the testimony of Carl Saunders, inventor of the micro CHIP. Now I don't know if this is a video. There's a lot here. Don't believe this hoax. What hoax they talk about? Dealing with this is the individual here, him right there. He gave his testimony. This looks like the video. I mean, I don't want to play the video, and it's on YouTube, as you can see. You know, it's on YouTube. Carl Sanders helped design the first implantable micro CHIP, one of two, and I'll put this in the actually I'll put it in the in case anybody wants to check it out. Yeah, this is good right here. The brother put Tazad Bun Yahawada 144. Proverbs 1:17. Surely in vain the net is spread in the sight of any bird. Right, that's why they have to come with deception. And they also have to come with, you know, they have to come with deception, and they also have to, you know, well, pretty much they have to come with deception. There was another point that came to mind, but it kind of slipped my mind for the moment. So you get it. So you know, you get a chance, you watch that video. It's going to break down, you know, what this individual said concerning that MOTB, or the micro C here. All right, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. And that's pretty much what it is. You know, we've done so many lessons on this. I mean, this might be one of them. Yeah, I believe this is the scripture that we've broken down the most, and did the most videos, you know, out of all the different breakdowns. You know, Revelation 13 from the 16th verse to the 18th verse, you know, and he goes into breaking, you know, the charagma and all that down, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. So the Spirit, you know, allowed him to tap in, to figure out what you see when you watch this video. You see when you watch it. You know, he pretty much, you know, breaks down the Greek and everything. Now, when you get down here to the chi psi stigma, right here, chi psi stigma. When you go to the Greek in it, chi psi stigma, it's not going to really break it down in the Greek here, because it's just going to tell you 666, the meaning of which is the basis of much vain speculation. And it's not a vain speculation, it's just that people don't know. But you do have some that you know, have an idea, or some that actually know. You know, we here at Great Millstone actually know the 22nd letter, 14th, and an obsolete letter, which is stigma, as a cross of the Greek alphabet intermediate between the 5th and the 6th used as numbers. And then when you go to stigma, yeah, see this word stigma here, right here, it means to stick, an example, prick. And this stigma here also goes with Galatians chapter 6, verse 17. From henceforth let no man trouble me. This is the Apostle Paul speaking. For I bear in my body the marks of the Lord Yahushai. Now he was saying he was, you know, stigmatized by the, you know, the crucifixion of Yahushai, you know, symbolically upon himself. But the marks that the Lord Yahushua had were actual physical marks, because they pierced his hands, you know, they pierced his side, they pierced his feet, you know, which also goes hand in hand with Revelation, the 22nd chapter, you know, where King David prophesied about Yahushua. And then when he resurrected, the apostle Thomas wasn't there. He wasn't present. And when he wasn't present, he said, unless I put my hands in the prints of his finger and in his side, I'm not going to believe that he rose. And then when the Lord, you know, came to him, he said, here, put your finger in, you know, in my hand and in my side. And then when he did that, he said, my Lord and my power, you know, because he actually put his finger and his hand in these wounds. So they were actual wounds. So those actual wounds, you know, that here it uses the word marks with the S at the end, goes back to the Greek word stigma, which is the 6th letter in the Greek alphabet. You know, Greek alphabet, which the word alphabet goes back to alap bayath, which is the I and the ta. So you have I'm sorry, not Greek alphabet, Greek numbers. Right? No, it's a Greek alphabet. Is it the Greek alphabet? Beta, epsilon. Got sigma. Greek numbers. Let's see something. This is just given the numerical value, because see the Greek also has a numerical value, just like the Hebrew. but it's not given. Let's see. See right there, stigma, mark, brand. And this is the delivery system, which would actually prick into, you know, the hand or the forehead, which would be the root word for mark, which is charagma. All right. So it doesn't show it here, but when you go to the 666, the 666 Chi-Psi stigma, the stigma takes you back to the word stigma here, stizo, or stizo, to stick, an example, prick. A mark pricked in or branded upon the body. To ancient Oriental usage, slaves and soldiers bore the name or the stamp of their master or commander, branded or pricked, cut into their bodies to indicate what master or general they belong to. And that's pretty much what they want to do, because they understand that, you know, branding is a form of ownership. You know, when you have, you know, cattle, which they considered everyone outside of them, the Amalekites that call themselves, you know, so-called Jews, you know, they consider everybody else cattle. They consider everybody else goy. So this is their way of stamping, you know, their property with this mark, and that's what it's all about. It says there were even some devotees who stamped themselves in this way with the token of their gods. Yeah, because when you go back to the law, when you wanted to become a servant for life, you had to have an awl stuck into your ear at the door in the sight of judges, you know, by this master that was going to be your master forever, and that was a sign that you were his slave for life. And pretty much it's a badge. That's why here, when you go to Revelation 13:16, on the word mark, right, it goes to the Greek word charagma, and it says here, of the mark stamped on the foreheads or the right hand as a what? As the badge of the followers of the anti-Messiah, which are the anti-Messiah system. It's not one anti-Messiah. It's a badge. And what is a badge? Badge, a distinctive emblem worn as a mark of office, membership, achievement, licensed employee, etc. And what is an employee or licensed employment? Let's see. Is an employee? They're probably ain't gonna say. They're probably not gonna say it is the same as a slave. No, an employee is not the same as a slave. I knew they were gonna say that. But you do have, let's see, employee-employer relation, and that was either the Barron's Law Dictionary or the Black's Law Dictionary. Employer relationship, slave and master. Historically, employment law was rooted in the master-servant doctrine. That's it, master-servant. So you have a master, you have a servant. So an employee or employment is, because what is an employee? Someone that's employed by who? An owner. Who is the owner? The master. Doctrine, which created a rigid hierarchy similar to slavery, where employees were treated as servants with restricted rights. And you do, because any employee out there has restricted rights. You don't have the same rights as the owner. The owner, if he doesn't want to come in that day, he doesn't have to. You have to call in. He doesn't have to call in. he could do whatever the hell he wants to do. And if you take too many days off, what they do, they fire you. So you have a lot of restrictions. So that's like what with the slave, pass. You were only able to go to the store or whatever the case is, or go to a particular place to pick up something and bring it back. And if you didn't have that slave pass, you were at the you were in danger of getting lynched. See, it says while modern labor law emphasizes voluntary contract and compensation, some critics, such as those discussed on Reddit, argue that economic necessity can blur the lines between employment and coerced labor. Yeah. Because even, like I said, it's either in the Black's Law Dictionary, or it could be in the Barron's Law Dictionary, where you have employee relationship, and it says slave and master relationship. It's the same thing. And we just got it here. Historically, employment law was rooted in the master-servant doctrine. And that's why it's known as a badge. A badge is, a symbol that you belong to a master. And that's what the MOTB, the micro CHIP, is all about. And I wouldn't be surprised if each one of those micro CHIPs that they put in the people is assigned directly to a particular international banking family, or a particular international banking family member. You see? So that way it could be identified. When you scan this individual, oh, this individual belongs to so-and-so. Like in the movie Blade, you had those vampires, and then you had the flunkies that had a tattoo, I believe, behind their ear or something like that, or on their neck, and it showed what vampire they belonged to. You see? So this is what they're doing. So this whole system that we see, this war and this crisis that we see going on, could very well usher in the MOTB. And let's hope it does, because the sooner this thing pops off, the sooner Yahushua will come, destroy this place, and come and deliver his purchased possession. I pray, Yahweh Bashem Yahushua, that this lesson was edifying. I hope, brothers and a few sisters followed along. I hope it was edifying. Till the next time I say Shalom.